Tonight, we're going to talk about a story that happened in a Hong Kong cinema. I remember when I was young, I was actually quite afraid of going to the movies, not because the films themselves were scary, but because the old-style cinemas in Hong Kong used to feel a bit creepy, especially when you went to the restroom alone, walking down those long corridors. Hearing the hum of the air conditioning above and the muffled sounds of movies playing in the distance, it always felt like someone was following you. And in fact, there have always been quite a number of spooky stories about cinemas in Hong Kong. Tonight, I'm going to tell you one of them. This happened to a man named Xing, who loved watching movies. It took place nearly 30 years ago, and today I'm going to tell you what happened. Back then, he would watch almost any film he could. What he loved most was experiencing the big screen inside a cinema. It wasn't like now, where you can watch films easily in many ways. At that time, if you wanted to see a movie, you usually had to go to the cinema or rent a disc to watch at home. But as a poor university student with only a bit of part-time income, Xing spent almost all the money he earned from part-time work on movie tickets. One day, he went to a slightly old-fashioned cinema in Yau Ma Ti. The place had 4 screening rooms, and its decor was already a bit worn out. The walls and carpets had faded. Unlike modern cinemas, the entrances to the screening rooms didn't have solid doors for soundproofing. Instead, there were thick, heavy, dark-colored curtains hanging over the entrances, which you had to push aside to get in or out. Xing chose this cinema for a simple reason. The tickets were cheap, and it was close to where he lived. That time, after finishing a movie, he planned to go to the restroom before leaving. But when he came out of the restroom, he noticed there weren't many staff inside the cinema, not enough to check tickets properly, especially after a movie had already started. If you walked into another screening room, almost no one would stop you. So, for the first time, Xing tried something bold. After coming out of the restroom, he simply walked into another screening room. Before he went in, he looked around carefully to make sure no staff were nearby. He had already decided which seat to take, somewhere high up, near the side, so he wouldn't draw attention. In the end, no one noticed. With just one ticket, he watched 2 movies. After the second screening, Xing walked back into the lobby, feeling extremely excited. He thought he'd discovered a nearly foolproof way to save money, and he was already planning to try it again next time. So he stood in the lobby, looking around to see which seats were usually less popular. That's when he noticed something strange. In this cinema, for every single screening, no matter the movie or the time slot, there were always 4 seats that were already sold. And they were always in almost exactly the same position, right in the middle. This strange pattern made Xing wonder, who on earth could be booking these same 4 seats for every screening, every time of the day? That night, when he got home, his mind was still stuck on those 4 seats that were always sold. He remembered clearly, right in the middle, with hardly anyone sitting in the seats around them. But those 4 spots were always booked. Could it be that someone's permanently reserving those seats to resell the tickets? Or maybe the cinema keeps them for some special purpose? The more Xing thought about it, the stranger it seemed. He even felt a strong urge to deliberately sit in one of those seats, just to see what would happen. At the same time, he couldn't resist wanting to share his money-saving secret with someone. So he called his friend Peter and excitedly said, "Hey, I found a way to watch 2 movies with just 1 ticket, maybe even 3. At first, Peter was skeptical. "Come on, you're joking, right? It can't be that easy." Xing then explained step by step how he had tried it at the Yau Ma Ti cinema, describing the rush of adrenaline, as if he was committing a perfect crime. Peter was a little tempted, but still worried. What if you get caught? That'd be embarrassing, and you'd probably have to pay for it too. Xing smirked. "Nah, the staff won't notice. Think about it, once the movie started, they don't have time to check tickets." In the end, Peter said, "All right, but unless you try it a few more times without getting caught, I'm not going with you." He even thought to himself that this time, he'd push the limit, not just watch 2 movies, but maybe 3, to see if his trick really had no limits. Before bed that night, he opened the cinema listings page in the newspaper and circled the movies he wanted to watch. He even planned out exactly how to move quickly between screenings in the corridors, and noted down parts of the cinema's layout, thinking, this time, it's gotta be flawless. The next day, Xing returned to that old Yaomati cinema. Just like before, he bought a single ticket, and even as he stood at the box office, he was already planning, finish the first movie, then slip into the next screening. This time, he chose a Hong Kong film first, because the ticket was cheaper, and the money saved could basically cover the free admission to the second film. When the first movie ended, Xing headed straight for the next screening room, ready to watch a Hollywood blockbuster. As he pushed aside the first thick curtain and stepped into the narrow space between the 2 curtains, suddenly, a beam of flashlight shone out from inside. Xing's heart skipped a beat. He instantly knew it was a staff member coming out. He quickly pressed himself against the back of the curtain, holding his breath, even worried that his heartbeat might be heard. Luckily, it was pitch dark in there. The staff member only shone the light forward for a moment, then slowly walked out, completely unaware that someone was hiding behind the curtain. Xing let out a quiet sigh of relief and quickly slipped into the second screening room. The moment he stepped inside, a blast of icy air hit him in the face. The air conditioning here felt much colder than in the other rooms, as if it was on a completely different system. The chill made him shiver. Following the aisle, he walked all the way up to the very top row, to one of the most secluded seats, and slowly settled in to watch the second film. But in truth, there was something else he was paying more attention to. He remembered that for this film as well, the same 4 seats in the center had already been sold as soon as tickets went on sale. He kept sneaking glances in that direction, wanting to see exactly who had been reserving those seats every time. However, halfway through the movie, those 4 seats were still completely empty. Not a single person had shown up. Xing thought to himself, looks like they're not coming today. From his seat near the side, he had a clear view of those seats, right in the middle of the theater. They'd been empty for so long, and no one seemed to care. It felt like such a waste. So, Xing made up his mind. Slowly, he stood up, waited for a moment when the theater was pitch dark, and used the sound of the film to cover his footsteps as he made his way toward the 4 mysterious seats in the center. The moment he sat down, he understood why no one ever chose these spots. It was freezing. It felt as if an air vent was positioned directly above his head, blasting cold air straight down onto him. The chill was enough to make his skin prickle. Still, this was the center seat, with the best view in the house, so he decided to bear with it and keep watching. About 15 minutes later, suddenly, a hand gently tapped him on the shoulder. Xing's heart jolted. He turned his head and saw a cinema staff member. A wave of guilt hit him instantly. After all, he hadn't actually bought a ticket for this seat. The staff member lowered his voice and said, "Someone's bought this seat. Sir, could you please return to the one you originally purchased?" Xing forced himself to stay calm. "Well, since no one's sitting here right now, I might as well stay for the time being. I bought the wrong ticket earlier, picked a bad seat. If the person comes, I'll give it back to them." The staff frowned slightly. "I hope you won't make things difficult for me. This really isn't your seat, and if there's an argument later, it won't be good for anyone." At that moment, Xing actually felt less nervous. He was certain the staff wasn't checking tickets, only asking him to move. So he played along, giving himself a way out. "All right, I'll just go to the restroom first, and then come back." Leaving the theater, Xing slowly made his way toward the restroom. Just as he pushed open the restroom door, a new figure appeared beside him. An elderly man, dressed in a traditional Chinese gown, with a blank expression, quietly walking in alongside him. Xing thought, what era is this? Who still wears a gown like that to watch a movie? Still, since the old man didn't say a word, he didn't pay much attention. until he was washing his hands. The old man beside him suddenly spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Young man, whatever seat you bought, sit in it. Don't sit in someone else's seat." When Xing heard the old man say that, he immediately frowned, his tone showing a hint of impatience. "Which eye of yours saw me sitting in someone else's seat? You sure like to meddle in other people's business." The old man didn't respond. He simply gave Xing a strange, unreadable look, then slowly turned around and walked away. After finishing in the restroom, Xing headed back toward the screening room. As he walked up the stairs, step by step, he suddenly felt that something wasn't right. The staircase he had come down earlier had dark red walls, but now this one was dark green. Even the pattern and color of the floor tiles were completely different from before. Weird. Did I take the wrong way? Then he told himself, "Forget it. Maybe it's just the lighting. My eyes are playing tricks on me." So he kept walking until he reached the entrance to the screening room. He pushed aside the first thick curtain, and a rush of icy air hit his face, making him shiver instantly. Shrinking his shoulders, Xing reached out to part the curtain, intending to step inside. But then he froze. There was another curtain in front of him. He was certain that this cinema's entrance had always had only 2 layers of curtains. Why was there a third one now? Though uneasy, he forced himself to keep going, and pushed it aside. That freezing sensation washed over him again. And when he looked ahead, there was yet another, a 4th curtain. Standing in front of it, Xing could feel the hairs on the back of his neck rising. Should he open it or not? He was still hesitating when, suddenly, from behind him, he felt movement. A dry, bony hand slowly reached past his side and pulled the 4th curtain open. Xing gasped sharply, whipping his head around. It was the old man, the same one from the restroom earlier, dressed in a traditional Chinese gown. The old man didn't say a word. He merely stepped slightly to the side, holding the curtain open, gesturing for him to go in. Xing glanced inside and saw the movie screen glowing. He finally let out a breath of relief. Maybe I really did remember wrong. This cinema must have 4 curtains after all. He walked in. The 4 mysterious seats were still empty, and there was no staff in sight. Perfect, he thought. I'll just keep sitting here. So he settled down again, eyes fixed on the big screen, pretending as if nothing had happened. Halfway through the movie, suddenly, someone was coughing nonstop. The sound was low and raspy, and in the quiet of the theater, it felt piercingly loud. Instinctively, Xing turned to look to his right. 1 seat away, a figure was sitting there. It was him, the old man he'd seen in the restroom earlier. Xing froze. He remembered clearly that when he sat down, there had been no one to his right. So how was he here now? Slowly, he turned his head to the left. In another seat that had been empty before, sat another man in a traditional Chinese gown. His face was deathly pale, his eye sockets sunken, his gaze locked on the screen ahead without a single movement. Even his lips were almost the same color as his skin, an unnatural, bloodless white, as if no blood was flowing through his body at all. At that moment, Xing was certain he had chosen the wrong seat. A chill gripped him from the inside out. He stammered, sorry, over and over, while quickly heading toward the theater exit. When he reached out and pulled aside the first curtain, his heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of his chest. It was pitch dark inside, but beneath the second curtain, he could see a faint light leaking through. Xing let out a shaky breath of relief. He hurriedly pulled open the second curtain. Light flooded his vision. It was the lobby's lighting, but not quite. A familiar figure was standing just ahead of the exit. It was the cinema staff member from earlier, looking straight at him with a faint smile. The staff member tilted his head slightly, his voice airy and slow. "Sir, did you go back to your own seat?" That smile didn't feel welcoming. It felt as though he already knew exactly what had happened to Xing. For a second, Xing just stood there, unable to answer, a wave of cold shooting from the top of his head down to the soles of his feet. He glanced quickly around. The lobby was completely empty, so quiet that the only sound was his own breathing. When he looked back toward where the staff member had been, both the smile and the figure were gone. Xing almost ran out of the cinema, only stopping once he reached the street corner. The night wind blew against his face, but his forehead and back were soaked in sweat. He turned to look back at the cinema entrance. The thick curtains and dim yellow lights were still there, but to him, they no longer looked the same. From that day on, Xing never again sat in a seat he hadn't paid for. And he finally understood why some seats in the cinema were always sold out.